Ahoy, sailors! Captain Preach here. Have you noticed something? I bet you haven't, because I bet most of you don't even go there, to the place that we do not speak of. It is, of course, the official forums, but I tell you, I visit it regularly. It's part of my job. Of course it is. I want to keep up to date with all kinds of points of views. I visit Discords, MMO, every now and again, Reddit, and the official forums, see what's going on. And the advantage of the official forums is these are guys who are definitely still playing the game, right? That's a big difference than a lot of the other outlets that let anybody and everybody who signs up post away. On the official forums, these guys are playing the game in one form or another. They have an active account. And what's been interesting over the last, say, month or so, very recent, and it's not really taken off yet, but it is happening, is a shift in the winds. And that shift is definitely the what's being colloquially known as the rise of the gamers. Because it's no secret that gaming as a hobby, or certainly over the last 5 years, has become very much a culturally accepted thing, if not a popular culture thing, where people were taking on the genre in order to fit in and change their look and stuff, very similar to how people follow other fads in the past. I used to be a goth, for example. Some of you might find that shocking, but there was a time when I wore enormous pants and when I had hair, bright blue hair, to go along with that, because that was part of the culture I was in. I was in the heavy metal culture for a very long time. Now, what's also happening is Blizzard are being a little better on communication. And I will point that out because I think it's important. Blizzard are being better on communication. We're seeing the community, the official blue community guys, stick their nose in more regularly than before. Not a lot, but far more regularly than they have been, and certainly on hot button issues. Now, we can look at this with one of two ways. Either this is something that needs to happen, because communication's been so bad. It's like, look, we've got to get involved here. We can't just ignore it anymore. And maybe it's something to tide over until things get better. And then they can kind of drift away again and keep their mouths shut, which has been the Blizzard policy now for like 3 expansions. Or they're actively trying to do something. So as at this point, they are actively trying to stick their nose in. The winds of change that I'm seeing then, and you can take a look at the official forums both in the US and the EU to see this, is the gamers are just starting to say no, particularly into the bad players and their complaints. Now, this is really interesting for me because it has been, at least I felt this way, and some of you maybe would agree with me here, that for the longest time, it was almost unacceptable within the gaming community to really call out bad players on their demands in a very heavy-handed way. Because although we can see how ridiculous it was, we kind of contained our comments and thoughts on that to our own individual communities. But you've stuck your neck out and went, no, actually, it's because you're fucking terrible that these things are happening to you, and everything you're saying is completely stupid. And not only having that backed up by a number of people, because what would happen is someone would post that, but you would be heavily attacked for being mean, being elitist, all this kind of nonsense that was flying around, particularly during Legion. Elitism was a very big deal. I'm starting to see that drift away, despite the recent stuff with Mythic Plus. But it's definitely shifting now, where the guys are not only responding in this way and saying, actually, no, this is because you're fucking bad. And nothing, you're trying to change things that don't need to change. And not only that, but they're being backed up en masse by many other people. And I've viewed a number of threads today, which were the standard sort of complaints we would expect to see throughout World of Warcraft, that usually I would expect to see somebody reply like that and get called out on it and be downvoted and all that, because we do have an upvote and downvote system on the official forums now. But instead of that actually being upvoted en masse, more replies saying that. And it feels like, for the most part, the guys who are still playing World of Warcraft are just saying, no more. No, we've had enough. Like, we put up with this for a long time. We really did. And a big point of this is something I brought up towards the end of Legion, is when we were discussing the BFA Alpha, is I pointed out that as Mythic Raiders, there are often changes to World of Warcraft which are really inconvenient or horrible for Mythic Raiders. However, for the most part, it seemingly makes things a lot better for the greater majority of people who aren't in that position, and therefore it's an acceptable change. So, to clarify that, the AP system. The AP system hurts Mythic Raiders far more than anyone else. That's just a fact, and people get all up in, oh, no, it doesn't. Yes, it does. It's a simple fact that it actually really, really is bothersome if you're dealing with very high item level gear very early on in the game. it's a big pain in the ass because not only do we have access to it earlier, the bonuses and effects it provides are actually far more important for the timing of the content we're doing. So consider that. It's like the defensive properties might be useless to you. So if you go, well, why the hell would I farm for something like a little shitty shield? Well, in Mythic, where you not only have significantly different encounters than even Heroic, they're vastly different, the damage is also significantly greater. And therefore, having those defensive bonuses is a really big deal in that environment. It's a really big deal, particularly when you're dealing with stuff with perhaps less gear than what you'd have if you were steadily progressing Mythic, right? So when we see changes like Azerite power or Artifact power in the last expansion, it's kind of like, this is really going to suck, because it is, as a factual objective basis, even if you're doing high Mythic Plus or high PvP or whatever it might be, if you're in the higher echelons of the game, it's more of a pain in the ass to deal with than if you were a more casual player. But then you go, well, I kind of see the point. It's actually a good thing for casual players, and therefore, okay, that's fine. We have to farm this thing. This is better for everybody else. We understand that, and we generally don't say anything and just leave it there. And part of the reason that nobody really criticizes this stuff as much as they probably should, although we were very outspoken about it considering it's going into BFA, certainly I was, is because you're going to get pasted as elitists, and you're going to get these very redundant, very monotonous, and very repetitive arguments like, why do you care about blah, blah, blah? Why would you care about this? Leave us alone. I recall very heavily how much I was attacked for criticizing the Legion Legendary system when it was announced, because it made no sense from a casual player perspective compared to what I saw. And I was lambasted en masse by so many people who were saying, you're taking fun away from us. And I was like, I don't understand how having 3 seconds of, say, Guardian the Ancient Kings on a prop pally in the open world quest system is a benefit to you, where it's a very big deal for us, and it's completely down to RNG and so on. I laid out the case pretty clearly as far as I'm concerned, yet I was massively attacked for that. This time around, though, I'm sorry for the coughing, by the way. I'm very ill. I'm very, very ill. I believe my kids have infected me with something. This time around, amongst the usual suspects, which are like gaining high item level from doing silly content, as I showcased in the last video, my priest, who has something like an hour and a half played at 120, has several items over 380. Yes, it's extremely lucky, but it shouldn't really be possible. And I do want to clarify my point here. No, I don't really care what other people have in terms of gear. It makes no effect to me whatsoever if little Billy has 400 item level. It makes no difference to me in the environment I'm in. I'm not delusional enough, though, to say that that's pretty unhealthy for the game. I am not that delusional. We're now having it thrown back in our faces like, well, aren't you raiding for the reward, for the challenge? Yes, but that only exists once. There's very easy arguments for that. It only ever exists once when you first defeat it. It's such an easy and silly argument. And you're right, that's why I raid, and I understand that farming gear is a means to an end. But it would also be utterly delusional to suggest that there aren't people who would also believe in a logical way that doing the hardest content in the game, either that be PvP or Mythic Plus or whatever, would have a higher item level or a higher gearing than people who can do content that they can AFK. I think that makes logical sense in any video game. I don't want to sound like an elitist here, because I don't think it is. I think it's a very logical thing. I would be baffled beyond all recognition to walk into another video game and the hardest bosses don't provide anything of value at all. In fact, if I do the easy stuff that I could just be online for, I don't even need to really do anything whatsoever. That provided me the best stuff in the game in order to go and tackle the hardest bosses should I could be asked, because they don't provide anything other than the recognition that I actually did it. That would be very strange. And let's remember here, it was only a few years ago when the late great TB was a big proponent of the issues that a lot of companies were making, and seemingly now Activision Blizzard, for providing extremely overpowered items in the form of pre-order bonuses. Several reviews or videos done by TB looking at different games often came with a warning like that. Like, if you pre-ordered this game, please don't be aware that if you pick this stuff up, it's extraordinarily overpowered and it actually ruins a lot of the game. Now, true, that was mostly in single-player content, but it has leaked into the online world, as we've seen recently. Today's specific topic I want to look at, though, is in fact community perception. And as far as I know, following Blizzard for as long as I have, this is the first time Blizzard has openly pointed out that a big issue they face, not the only issue, of course, is community perception and how do they go about changing it. And I was like, thank God you've pointed this out. Now, community perception should be no stranger to anybody who's been at my channel for a while. It was a big topic in Legion where we brought awareness to community perception. So what is it? Well, it's pretty simple. We, as very passionate and invested players of World of Warcraft, we like to believe that it's quite normal to be checking MMO Champion daily, to be up to date on your class and see what the boys in the lab are doing on the Discord servers on a day-by-day, minute-by-minute basis, to be following devs and stuff on Twitter to keep up to date, to be watching live streams and YouTube videos on the regular about our favorite game. We consider that to be pretty normal because that's what we do as passionate gamers of one particular game, especially. That's what we like to do because we're very invested emotionally into the game. We enjoy it immensely. But it's obviously absurd to expect everybody to be doing that. And that, again, it's like breaking that delusional wall. Yes, I do it, but I'm not delusional enough to expect that Tom and Jerry, who work all day at some job that's rather stressful, that doesn't even have access to a PC for the internet and things like that, are going to be doing that with their 10-minute downtime on their break instead of calling their partner or checking in with the kids or just going outside for a smoke or whatever it is those guys might be doing. I absolutely do not expect most people to be doing that. And one of the big issues Blizzard's had in the past, and they confirmed this in Mists of Pandaria, is that most people leave the game if they keep changing the game too much because they frankly can't keep up, and they shouldn't be expected to keep up as much as they have to do. So what is the most common question that I get at the start of, usually of the alpha of a new WoW expansion? Is the moment the alpha drops, these people come in and they ask me what is overpowered. And they try and get in contact and they find out what is going to be overpowered, and mainly so they can start leveling it as soon as possible in the current expansion. Now, the question is obviously ridiculous to the extreme, because during an alpha and a beta and even on live, the classes are constantly shifting and changing. With every patch note, it shifts and changes immensely. But it doesn't stop people from just wanting this quick, easy, bite-sized information, because frankly, they're not going to keep up to date on a minute-by-minute basis, and they don't really care enough to go and do that. And that's very normal for most games. I play World of Warcraft a lot, but I also play a lot of other games. What I don't do is browse their forums. What I don't do is keep up to date with their Steam page and their Steam community and things like that. Of course not. If I was to do that for every game, I'd never even play a game. It'd be absolute madness. So from that perspective, it makes total sense that they want quick, bite-sized information, and that's usually what they call done at that point. They don't want to invest or can't invest in the time afterwards. So whatever message or answer they receive to that question, even if they come to me and I say, well, it's pointless me answering that question, which is what I often do because it's going to change on a dime, then they'll go somewhere else. And as we well know, all across the internet and in real life, people like to answer questions, even if they don't know the answer. You guys will be very familiar with this bizarre, I don't know, is it narcissism? Is it fear of being wrong? I don't know what it is, but how many times have you asked somebody a question and they've given you an answer and you very quickly found out that was just not the case, and basically they were guessing or hoping for the best? And sometimes it's even correct, but purely out of luck more than anything. So you get this information. So in this, we're going to look at this post by Ithysons. I know his real name. I don't... How weird is that? I know the real name. I can't pronounce the actual tag online. But let's read this. It was in regards to Enhancement Shaman. So I should point out here, we are going to talk about a couple of specs that are currently considered to be not good, but this isn't a deep dive into those specs individually, so please don't fill the comment sections with think pieces on these classes. That's for a different time. We're actually looking at just community perception today. So this is the reply in regards to Enhancement Shamans and the feelings of some of the people on Enhancement. But he says, right now, the issue of low DPS and so on. Right now, that's an issue with the perception of shamans. Numbers-wise, shamans can put them up, both elemental and enhancement. However, the perception of shamans in 8.0 has led you guys into having a harder time when in reality, you're perfectly viable. I wish I had a solution to this right now, but it's something we're aware of, and I know it becomes a problem if a class is known as struggling. One of those unfortunate WoW things when it comes to community discussion on viability that has existed since vanilla. A little off topic from the Ops original post, but just letting you know it is something we are aware of. What a clap post. Well done. Really well done, because he's 100% correct. This is an extraordinarily difficult thing to change. So let's summarize it in a very simple way. We got told shamans, specifically Enhance and Ellie, were not going to receive their appropriate changes when Blizzard realized the Azerite system was a disaster until 8.1. The first time in the history something like that has ever happened, and they weren't the only classes to be given this notification. So, of course, widespread, and people, including myself, and rightfully so, I want to point out here, I'm not saying I shouldn't have said anything. I absolutely should have said something. The information spread large and wide that enhancement shamans were struggling and were bad, or shamans in general were bad. And people misinterpret that in a number of ways. Specifically, the shaman's big issue was more gameplay orientated than damage. Now, notice I didn't say not damage. I said mainly gameplay orientated. They didn't like how their class played. It seemed like a big step backwards. It didn't seem anywhere near as fun, less versatile, all kinds of issues like that. And damage is something Blizzard can change again on a dime. It's not difficult to make, say, Storm Strike, an enhancement shaman's primary attack, do bazillion damage. Like, it's not difficult for Blizzard to change that, but changing the whole gameplay, that requires a lot more time because it involves the synergies of the spells and so on and so forth, how it flows, how the gear scales with it, and so on and so forth. So it's considerably more difficult. But that doesn't change the fact that the message was heard loud and wide that shamans were bad. And I saw several popular streamers saying things like, well, imagine taking, say, an enhancement shaman that does, what, like 1 DPS? And that was never the issue. It wasn't that bad. Were, say, Havoc Demon Hunters better? Yes, they were, specifically in dungeon environments, but that didn't mean that enhancement shamans were in the bin in terms of what they could do. And we proved this several times on my stream when we did high Mythic Plus, certainly when 10 was particularly difficult in early game of BFA, where we took enhancement and Ellie and myself, and we did our dungeons just fine. They actually bring quite a lot of useful utility at that level. Now, it also doesn't help that it's incredibly easy to get numbers that most people don't really understand. So we have access to a lot of data, certainly these days, more data than ever, where we can go to websites like Raider.io, and the first thing, if you go to Raider.io, that it pretty much presents you with, if you click Mythic Plus, is the best teams in the world and what compositions they have. Now, I will point out at this point, there is an elemental shaman on the front page. But what people are going to see is pretty much all Blood DKs, a lot of Mistweaver Monks, a lot of Rogues, and a lot of Havoc Demon Hunters. What they're probably not going to dig too much further into is, one, this is only the top 20 ranks it shows on the first page. Two, it's pretty much made up of about 6 or 7 different teams only. A lot of these runs are by the same team, so of course their setup has remained the same, which further skews the information you're gaining at a glance because you're only seeing like a select few, something like 40 or maybe 50 people in the world playing the game on this page. And also, they're probably going to ignore that above that, Raider.io does do something decent. It actually shows you the class, the entire spec breakdown of everybody doing Mythic Plus. And what you can see is it's nowhere near as bad as people in the community perceive it to be. What we do have is the odd outliers. Without question, we have the odd outliers. That is without a doubt. There are some classes, certainly, that play differently in a dungeon environment and prefer to be a certain spec in that environment. A great example would be a mage. Now, I said in that environment, so we're talking about a dungeon environment where frost mages are very, very good. They naturally do a lot of things passively that really help out groups in most scenarios. And they have short cooldowns, makes them very, very nice. That doesn't mean that mages are bad. It just means that frost is better in that environment. And there's fire mages and arcane mages. What I would also say in a raid environment, I actually currently, on my mage, play all 3 specs in the raid. We're talking about Mythic Plus here, where I generally will go Frost. I've done some as Fire, I've done 0 as Arcane, I think. But preferably I play Frost. Why? It suits that environment very, very well. If we were to look at some other outliers, such as Hunters. Now, it doesn't mean Hunters are underrepresented, but some can say there's an obvious issue with Survival and MM, as the vast majority of them are Beastmaster. However, I have done several high keys with Survival Hunters. The Hunters in our guild like Survival. They think it's fun. So they will go and they will do their 14 as Survival. Why? Because they want to and it's fun. Does it make the group not function? Absolutely not. It's just an easier, more effective time as BM. And of course, as gamers, we always take the path of least resistance. I would rather play the most effective spec, even if I don't enjoy it in some cases, simply because it's more effective in this environment and it makes our success rate go up. Does it mean it doesn't work if I don't do it, though? And that's the big difference. That's the community perception. So this was in response to the fact that somebody had done Mythic Plus and it was only a +7. But because they had an Enhancement Shaman in the group, they believed that's why they failed that dungeon, which is nonsensical at the extreme. It is nonsensical at the extreme to believe that's the case. And again, as I said at the beginning of the video, I was ultra happy to see that people were like, no, fuck you, that's not the case. Are Havoc Demon Hunters better? Are Rogues better because they bring max stealth? That's an interesting question. What are you talking about? Are you talking about the very niche, ultra cutting edge of the world runs? Is that what you're talking about? Because that's not what you're doing. Is it likely that you would have an easier time in that dungeon? Sorry for my voice. Is it likely that if you took... What's the #1 ranking right now? It is a TOS. All right, we've got Temple of Snecks. The #1 in the world right now is a not completed in time, run by a Blood DK, a Resto Druid, a Rogue, an Elemental Shaman, and a Havoc Demon Hunter. Now, ironically, this does contain a Shaman. If you brought that composition of classes, not the same players, and this is important, if you brought the same players to that +7 Temple of Sethralis, would it have been easier? Would you have definitely crushed it if that Shaman, for example, changed from Elemental but went Enhancement instead? Would you have finished it? Now, the answer is no. Maybe not. Because a lot of what happens at the extreme mega niche top end does not relate whatsoever to what happens in much lower dungeons. Is it not more likely that you failed that dungeon assuming appropriate gear to be in there because you overpulled, because you had no idea what was going on, you didn't know how to maximize the bosses, you didn't know when to time your cooldowns effectively, you didn't know how to handle the trash, somebody did something silly, you had no idea what to do with various things, and therefore just bringing the classes that have the #1 in the world wouldn't have made much of a difference. Just because you have the same classes of what the same people did, you're not those people. And I would also reiterate to the max here, you have absolutely no idea the type of issues and struggles the groups doing level 23 Mythic Pluses are having in comparison to what you're doing. There's even a less affix. There's a lot more at stake here, but it's easier to blame the class. Certainly if this is long-term information that you've had since pre-BFA. Now, let's go back to it. Let's say what he said, because he actually got attacked a little bit before the people came out with similar points to what I just made and said, whoa, 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 whoa. No, Enhancement might not be the best, but it is not bad. And someone even went to the lengths, and I loved this, went to the lengths to point out, actually, Enhancement's bringing AoE stun regularly, they're bringing interrupt, they're bringing purges, they're bringing all kinds of stuff that is actually very useful in this environment. They're actually very useful. Are they the most useful? Not saying that, but it's certainly not what's contributing to why you're dying. That's not the case. But they also went on, excuse me, they also went on to say, how can we change this? And obviously a lot of the response was like, well, you could have listened to us earlier on. And that's correct. There's no getting around that, and I'm not here to defend Blizzard. What they did to Shamans and the other classes like Feral Druids was abysmal. It was terrible. It was absolutely terrible, and that's not to be glossed over. But at the same time, how do you fix it? We often see Blizzard make class changes sometimes that come with the swing of the hammer, in terms of they just overbuff the crap out of them and suddenly they're mega, mega powerful. I remember specifically my druid that I had to re-roll to in Wrath of the Lich King. This is how long ago this has been going on. It's no doubt been going on in the Burning Crusade as well. But my druid, randomly out of nowhere, feral druids were struggling. Suddenly, they buffed feral druids as we started Ulduar so much that I had to stop tanking and go feral because it was doing so much damage, like 1k DPS more than others in a world of like 4k DPS. It's huge. It was far and away so much further ahead than anyone else that it was ridiculous that I wouldn't do that for the guild. Why do they make changes like this? Because we get pissed. It's like, sometimes if you're going to get nerfed, and we know this as long-term players, we'll definitely understand this, is that long-term players, we know that if we're overpowered, this is a bad sign because we're going to get hammered into the ground. Like, this is usually a bad sign. And it's a bit of a shame that we still think that, because in Legion, Blizzard did the best balancing job ever. And I know some people will scoff at that, but they did. Legion's balance was really good across the board. There was always somebody at the bottom and there was always going to be somebody at the top. But overall, they did a really, really good job in Legion. And they proved they could do it. Why they decided to screw it up in BFA, I have no idea. But that's besides the point now. Why do they overbuff so much? Well, part of it is to put it in the community spotlight in order to change community perception. Because as I said earlier, most people who have these perceptions, and we see these posts on Reddit, and we see them on MMO Champion, we see them everywhere, is people playing certain specs like Feral, like Enhance. They might get invited to a dungeon and then they're sent on their merry way. Like, we don't want you, because you're going to ruin the group. And you've got Enhancement Shaman there saying, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not that bad, right? I'm not that bad that it's what's going to cause this group to wipe. But certainly if it's a good player, it's just ridiculous. And I play with an Enhancement Shaman regularly. Our guild carries Enhancement Shamans for when we might need them. Who plays Elemental Enhancement in the raid? Is there a reason we wipe ever? No. They have a bottom of the DPS? No. There's all kinds of stuff that takes into account there. But it's not what the community believes. So we might see that they overbuff them in order to put them in the limelight so that people like myself and other streams, whatever you may watch, are all saying, actually, Enhancement's popping now. And that's how it trickles down using the old Whisper Game effect. It spreads. It spreads throughout the community and suddenly they're very popular. Or they have to make it so good or find something niche in a raid encounter where suddenly you're watching, say, the World First video by Method and suddenly you see a spec that you didn't think people would use. And it's like, well, actually, the Method used them. I heard that a great deal during the last expansion. You heard that a great deal. It would kind of happen to the mages when Limit used a fire mage at Gahoon, and people were like, fire? What's going on here? I thought fire was dog shit. Oh, in this scenario, it's actually really good. And when we get these stats, it can do some stuff. That's how it happens. They have to make it to the point where people see it in a big, strong light, and then ultimately that can end up screwing them up again because, of course, they need to bring it back down once this community perception has been shifted in order to rebalance it. So I ask you guys, I don't want to see answers like, they should have done this, they should have done that. I agree with you. We shouldn't have been in this situation in the first place, but it's not the first time we've been here, despite this one being a little unique. I ask you guys, you're Blizzard. You're aware that your community believes a spec can't do any damage, which is what the community believes. That's the message. Not a gameplay issue, can't do any damage issue. Similar to the Shadow Priests, right? Despite Shadow Priests are now rising again, that community perception is still there that Shadow Priests are dog shit. I get asked about it all the time. How are Shadow Priests now? Would I like to take one to a Mythic Plus? And that's in somebody who's coming to check with a stream and get updates from somebody who tries to follow this a lot. Let alone somebody who's just out trying to get his key done and so desperate to get it done he's not risking it by bringing a Shadow Priest. If you're Blizzard, how do you fix this? Excluding the don't break it in the first place argument. What do you do here? And it is difficult, isn't it? It is difficult. Do you overbuff them to madness? Do you just hope it changes itself? Do you wait to something like an MDI? Do you hope and pray the big guilds use it in a big raid and so it's in the limelight? What do you do? And I'm so happy. I'm so happy that Blizzard is openly addressing that, yes, we fucked up and we're trying to change it. But at the same time, we also have to change how the community feels about it. And that's more difficult. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.